Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to this new series of podcasts which I'm recording for the Mersey Royal Yacht Club and the UK North Blind Sailing Association. I'm going to be talking to various members of the club about how blind and partially sighted people can get involved with sailing. The first person I'm talking to has extensive experience of working with visually impaired people. I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's David Owen and I'm the present chair of UK North Blind Sailing Association, and I've been in that position for the last 2 years. And the charity itself was formed back in 2009, so 11 years ago, solely for the purpose of providing sailing opportunities for the visually impaired and blind community of Merseyside and Wirral.
We're embarking on then a series of podcasts here, David. Who are these podcasts aimed at and what are you hoping they get out of them?
Yeah, well, the podcasts are aimed specifically at members of the Merseyside and Wirral community who are visually impaired and blind, who may be interested in trying a different kind of outdoor activity, of which sailing, for me, is one of the best. So we're hoping that this will reach a wide audience in the region and encourage people to try something new. Because we've had fantastic experience over the last 11 years with people who are visually impaired and blind in providing sailing opportunities for them, both on the Mersey, on West Kirby Marine Lake and down at Menai Straits. So initially, this podcast will be available for people at Bradbury Fields, and we hope that it will find a much wider audience than that throughout Merseyside and Wirral. And the aim is that not only that they should be enthused by the prospect of trying something new sport, new outdoor activity, such as sailing, but that they will come along with us next season when we start sailing again after the lockdown, and come and join our cruise on the Mersey.
You've described sailing as one of the best outdoor activities. Tell us how you first got involved with that.
Well, I had the good fortune, Tom, to live in West Kirby, and one of the reasons I moved here is that I absolutely love sailing and windsurfing. And West Kirby is just the best place in the northwest for both of those activities. And I still go windsurfing. I'm now 61 years old, but I still love it, and I hope I'm going to keep doing it for another decade at least. And sailing was a natural development from windsurfing and a much more sociable aspect of the different types of sailing. So I owned various dinghies, anything up to 16 feet long, 2 sails, 2 crew, for several years locally. And then through my friend Rob, who is visually impaired, we started UK North Blind Sailing and managed to raise sufficient money to buy a Mersey Milne, which is a kind of yacht that I'll tell you about a bit later. And so for the last 11 years, we've had the pleasure of sailing those yachts on the Mersey and the Menai Straits.
Tell me a little bit more, if you would, David, about the Royal Mersey Yacht Club and the UK North Blind Sailing Association. Where is the club? What facilities does it have?
Okay, so they're 2 separate entities. The UK North Blind Sailing is a registered charity, and the members of the committee have joined the Royal Mersey Yacht Club at Rock Ferry to enable us to sail regularly. And the Royal Mersey Yacht Club at Rock Ferry is on Bedford Road East, which is on the far side of the Rock Ferry bypass, on the shores of the Mersey, looking across towards Liverpool Docks and the Britannia pub on the front near the old Garden Festival site. So it's a prime location for sailing. And the boats are, of which there are different types at the club, are moored on the Mersey just offshore during the sailing season.
If visually impaired people are thinking of actually making their own way to the club, how would they do that?
We arrange that. So we pick people up if they are close to where the sighted crews live, or we pick people up from Rock Ferry Station, which is literally 2 minutes away from the club itself. So we make it as easy as possible for people to come and join us.
And how much experience do you have of working with visually impaired people?
We all now have a lot. I've known Rob, who's visually impaired through macular degeneration, for 35 years or so as a friend, and we've done a lot of activities together. And then when we started the charity, the sighted crews and the volunteers went to Henshaws, and we did a full day of how to act as a guide, and that taught us a lot. Since then, we have been sailing regularly throughout the summer season with some social events during the winter. We have a Christmas party, for example, every year. And we've gained a huge amount of experience of working with people who are visually impaired. And we're always very conscious of the fact that everybody's impairment is different. And therefore, we will have a conversation with anybody who comes along with us just to establish the nature of the impairment or their blindness, and to get a good understanding of how much they can see, how much they can not see, and how much guiding they need, because the last thing we want to do is to be intrusive.
One issue, of course, that you'll be very aware of is safety. And a lot of visually impaired people may be thinking about that. What procedures do you have in place to make sure everyone does stay safe?
Yeah, safety is of vital importance to us, obviously. And we do a risk assessment every year, although the risks at Royal Mersey Yacht Club have not changed in the years that we've been there. But nonetheless, we review that. And at all times, somebody who is blind or visually impaired will be with a sighted volunteer or crew member. Not necessarily actively guiding them if they don't need it or they don't want it, but certainly walking alongside them between the club and the quay, and then onto the launch out to the boats. So people will always be accompanied to whatever degree they request and seems necessary in the circumstances.
Now, this may seem like the most basic of questions, David, but there'll be many people listening to this who've never actually been on a yacht. So at a very basic, simple level, how do you actually do that? How do you get onto the yacht?
Yeah, well, I fully understand that, Tom. Obviously, I mean, the vast majority of the population don't sail and may actually, despite living in Merseyside, never actually been on the water. We're very much aware of that. So one of the first things I should say, it is not the sort of elite sport that people sometimes think. Royal Mersey Yacht Club is not in the least, no disrespect to the other members, royal. There's nothing particularly posh about it. I think the Duke of Edinburgh may be the patron, and he probably went there once in about 1958, and that's been it. It's a very friendly club. It's a very friendly sport. And it's got great facilities. Perhaps I should just mention that really as a start before we virtually walk down the quay to the boat and get on the boat. It's got very good facilities. It's an old club and there's a lot of space there. So we've got male and female changing rooms and toilets. There's a bar, there's a dining room where they do casual suppers, pot roasts, etc., ravioli after some sailing events. Sometimes they have formal dinners to which people can go if they wish. And after we arrive at the club in the yard, we would go into the changing room and we will provide all the safety gear. We'll provide all the waterproofs and the life jackets, and we enable people to get kitted up in the changing room, and all that just goes over the top of your clothes. There's no need to shed any clothes while you're there. And people can leave their phones, their money, their keys, etc. in the changing room because the club is locked up whilst we're sailing. And then we will walk out of the club through the yard where all the boats are parked in the winter, but in the summer largely empty. And then it's probably 400 metres or so, I've never measured it, but from the club down past the refreshment rooms pub and down the old stone quay. And we walk down there as a group and we wait with all the other sailors, and sometimes there can be 20, 25 boats going out on a day. So there'll be quite a lot of people there standing around chatting and waiting for the launch, which is a powerboat, to come and pick us up. And there's usually two run by people who are employed by the club. And we get from the stone quay down into the launch. So one needs to be reasonably physically able and mobile to step off a stone quay down into a boat. So it might be 2 steps. The only difference between it being normal steps is that obviously the boat's moving up and down moderately. But there's always plenty of people around willing to help. Sometimes, has to be said, probably too many. But, we take control of helping people in and out of the boat. So once we're into the launch, one of which can hold 15 people, we chug very slowly out to the moorings, which are probably 100 metres offshore, where our boats are floating, attached to a mooring, which is basically a long chain attached to a huge lump of concrete on the bed of the Mersey. and then we transfer from the launch onto the yacht.
So again, you'd need to be fairly physically fit to manage that, would you?
Yes, I think anybody who sort of walks regularly or keeps reasonably mobile will not find it a problem at all. It's a bit unusual, obviously, because you move, when you get out to the boat, you're moving from one moving boat to another moving boat, and they may not be moving at the same time. But we're always very conscious of safety, particularly at this point. And Hugh, the boatman who drives the launch, is fantastic. He's great. He's so switched on to our needs that he is able to control the boat very, very carefully for when we get out of his launch and onto our sailing boat, onto the yacht.
Okay, so once you're on the yacht, again, I include myself in this. Many people might not know what a yacht is actually like. So could you describe it? And, how do you move around it?
Well, the yachts that we sail are called Mersey Milnes, which is Mylnes, and they are classic sailing yachts, which means that they are old, basically, which also happens to mean they need an awful lot of looking after, which is what we do during the winter. So they're made out of wood. They weigh 2.5 tons. In modern parlance, 8 meters long, so maybe 24, 25 feet. But they're what we call a day yacht. So they don't have a cabin. There's nowhere to go below. There's no bunks. It's an open cockpit, which we sit or stand in during the course of the sailing, because we're never going to be out for more than 4 or 5 hours at the most. So they're just specifically for day racing. And what we do when we get there is we step from the launch onto the yacht, and we ask the people who are sailing with us to just sit down on the bow, which is the front of the boat, in front of the mast. And there's only one mast on these yachts because they are quite small, whilst we take the cover off the cockpit, because it's there to keep the seagulls out and the rain out. We can then get down into the cockpit, and when we stand in the cockpit in Mersey Milnes, I'm 6'2", and when I'm standing in the cockpit, the top of it will come to the middle of my rib cage. Okay, so it's a very deep cockpit. So there is, once you're in there, you feel really safe and enclosed. Nobody ever falls out, for example. It's not like a dinghy where it can capsize and people get wet. That just doesn't happen on these boats. And so we all get into the cockpit, and there will be, on average, 3 or 4 of us. So there'll be myself, who's a skipper. The other skipper is John Patton, who you'll hear from later. We'll have another sighted crew who's experienced as we are. We've all been sailing for decades. And then we'll have either 1 or 2 blind or VI crew. And our crew are always VIs and blind. That's our sole purpose of sailing. If we don't have any VIs who want to come with us, we don't go out sailing, because that's the objective of our charity. So there may be 4 of us in the cockpit. There's room to move around. There's somewhere to sit if anybody wants to. But for most of the time, the crew will be standing, and the helmsman who's steering will be sitting.
And once you're on the yacht, who does what, and what would the visually impaired sailors be doing specifically?
Well, nobody's a passenger. Everybody has something to do, so everybody is involved in what's going on. And the first thing I would do, for example, when going with a new crew, is I will have been giving a running commentary all the way from the club down the quay into the launch. If people want it, I very happily describe what we're going past, what I can see from the launch. And then when we're on the yacht, before we do anything with somebody who hasn't been out before, is we'll give them a tour of the yacht, basically. So I will talk them around the layout of the yacht and tell them what's where and what does what in straightforward language. And if the new person wants to, they can go on a feeling tour, basically, of the yacht, and maybe go out onto the bow and just get a sense of how long the boat is and how wide, so that they feel comfortable with where the limits of it are, or the boundaries of it are. Throughout the whole of the sailing session, from getting onto the yacht all the way back to the moorings 2, 3, 4 hours later, I keep up a constant commentary of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what's coming next. So I'm always thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead to describe what's about to happen and what I want people to do. And what people do is that I, for example, as the skipper, would be at the back of the boat steering it, not with a wheel, as are on some big yachts, but with a tiller, which is a pole basically attached to the rudder, nice and simple. The sighted crew will be looking after the mainsail, which is the big sail that provides all our power, and that's attached to the boom, which is above our heads and moves about. And the VI crews will be looking after the jib, which is the smaller sail at the front. So they will have a rope each, and depending on which way the yacht is pointing, and therefore from which side the wind is coming, they'll be pulling or loosening that rope as I give them notice that we're about to turn and tell them exactly what to do. And we find that even when people have never been sailing before, they've never been on a yacht, within half an hour, they've got it.
So the visually impaired people that you've worked with, and you've got extensive experience of doing that, they've become pretty expert, haven't they?
They have indeed, yeah. We have a handful of regulars who just love it. At our peak, when we had lots of funding from the lottery and Sport England, we had, I think it was nearly 60 people on our books who would come sailing with us in various ways, because we were going on courses and we were going down to Plasmanai Sailing Centre. Sadly, funding's not quite so generous these days, as everybody knows. So our numbers of sailors have reduced quite a lot. But there is a hardcore who stuck with us, who love it, to the extent that they have been away on the tall ships, which are the 3-4 masted schooners that come into Liverpool once a year on the tall ships around the world race. And they've been and crewed on those, which, as people will probably know, are specially adapted in some instances for people with all sorts of disabilities.
Without going into too many details in terms of names and everything else, is there one visually impaired sailor in particular that you can think of who's really made amazing progress?
They all have, but I suppose the person who springs to mind immediately is John, who you'll be speaking to later, John Helt. And he just loves the sailing, and he is one of those who's been on tall ships. In fact, he inspired myself and Rob, who had never been on a tall ship, to do that. And we signed up to go on a tall ship to the Gran Canaries, and we were climbing the 85-foot masts and hauling on ropes and going out on the spars as they do in the movies. It was very exciting, and John had done that before we did it. So he is somebody for whom sailing is, I think, has become really important. And he understands everything that's going on.
Now, one thing that scares the life out of me is the idea of racing, but I'm sure they're safe. How do they work? And can visually impaired people get involved in those?
The reality is, Tom, that's all that happens at any sailing club around the world. I mean, sometimes around the country. I mean, sometimes people will go out on what we might call a jolly, just go for a sail. But actually, every time we go out, we're racing. However, we have to put that into context. These are big, heavy, old boats. They weigh, as I say, they weigh 2.5 tons. They're very slow. Their maximum speed is about 5 or 6 miles an hour. And when you're on the water, because of the sound of the water, the sound of the wind in the sails, it feels faster than that, which is part of the enjoyment. It's quite exhilarating. But the reality is everything happens very slowly. And the reason that we race is because it gives us a purpose for going out. Because, I mean, you can sail up and down the Mersey all you like, but in the end, it gets a bit too familiar. So racing is fun. It is competitive, but it's not, people aren't shouting at each other. And the boats, because they're classic boats, we never like to get too close to other boats because we don't want to damage them. So everything happens at a very sedate pace, and it's very sociable. That's the nice thing about it. There's quite a bit of banter going on between the boats as we're sailing along. And the way it works is that we'll have, in your average session of, say, two hours out on the water, we'll have 1, maybe 2 races, depending how strong the wind is. And the race officer will decide, according to what the tide's doing and what the wind's doing, what the course is going to be. So we might sail from Rock Ferry all the way across the Mersey down to Garston, get across to Bromborough and then back up to Rock Ferry. Or on some days, we might do what they call the upriver race, which is where we'll sail all the way from Rock Ferry, all the way past the 3 Graces, out to a buoy near Crosby, beyond the mouth of the Mersey, turn around, come back again. So that's just straight out and back. And that is just a joy. I mean, it's not really a race, it's a pleasure cruise. And people usually take a picnic with them on that because we're out for 4 or 5 hours. And the thing about racing is that there will always be at least one backup safety boat with us. So in the event of something going wrong, which is very, very rare, we have radios and we can call Hugh up on the safety boat and he'll just come and give us a tow and take us back to the moorings. So we're always completely safe, having a bit of fun and seeing Liverpool, the Mersey, from a perspective that I suspect the vast majority of the population never have, which is a joy.
Now, hopefully, we've inspired a few people to get involved. How do they find out more and join up with you?
Well, very simply, Tom, they can, if they go onto the website at UK North Blind Sailing Association, they will find there an email address, which comes to me, my phone number, my mobile phone number, and they're very welcome to get in touch and just find out more. And what we intend to do, once the present circumstances change, is to have people come to the club, have a look at the boats, get into the boats while they're in the yard, which we can do with steps, and just have a look around and get a feel for what we do and what we're like and how friendly we are. And then when the sailing season comes around again next April 2021, will hopefully come and join us and come out sailing. And there's no big commitment. If you want to come once and don't like it, that's fine. Or if you like John Helt, you absolutely love it and you want to come regularly, even better, because there is a sailing schedule all the way through the season from April till September, which everybody is welcome to join in on.
David Owen, thank you very much indeed. And anybody who wants to contact David can do so by phoning 07793 543 529. That's 07793 543 529.